Well, welcome. So it's getting better all the time. Mental health outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. And I'm Sister Arnetta Legree. And again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time. Mental health outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. You can find out more about us by logging onto our website at igbatt.com. And I'm going to turn down my music here that didn't seem to want to load. But anyway, we are back on track. Today, what I wanted to talk about were 10 things that are not helpful. There are certain things that we can do that can encourage a person to seek out mental health support, and then there are things that can discourage a person, whether or to seek out mental health support, and then there are things that can be done that we can do that can be discouraging to a person, a family member, or a loved one who is dealing with someone or living with someone with a mental illness. And I wanted to start just kind of come up with 10 things that we can discuss on this afternoon. 10 things that are not helpful. And again, this is Sister A.L. It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach. You can log on to our website at igbatt.com. You can write us at Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910. Again, that's Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910, or send us an email at igbatt1@AOL.com. Again, our website is igbatt.com, and we're going to be talking about 10 things that are not helpful. The first thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm reading my screen here, is asking the right question at the wrong time. Asking the right question at the wrong time. For example, asking your loved one who is living with a mental illness now, did you take your medications? Depending on when that question is asked or how that question is asked, it can kind of can come off as condescending. If your loved one is first of all, we all have a right to express our emotions. We all have a right to say what we like, what we don't like. If you agree with it or don't disagree, or agree or disagree, it's really none of my business, or who cares? Everyone has a right. Everybody has a God-given right to express how they feel or to say what it is they want or what they don't want, even if you agree or don't agree, right? So what happens sometimes, especially if you have a person who is living with a long-term mental illness, and you're the person that's been there for a while, and you guys get into a heated discussion, or they start showing different emotions, there's a tendency to say, okay, well, did you take your medications today? Okay, what does that have to do with it? Me taking my medications does not have anything to do with the fact I don't like broccoli, I don't like this, I don't want to do that. Just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean that a person has a right or someone else has a right to take their rights away, right? Just because you wouldn't do that to a person who has a cancer diagnosis or a person who has a kidney diagnosis, right? You wouldn't say, when they're expressing frustration about something, you would not necessarily say, oh, well, did you take your medication today, right? So again, good question. It's just that it can be seen as condescending depending on when the question is asked. People have rights. I have a right, again, to express how I feel. Next thing, blaming the person for their symptoms. The symptoms of mental illnesses, depending on the illness, can manifest in several ways. Some of these symptoms can be frustrating to the loved one or the person who's watching your loved one go through this. And again, these 10 things that are not helpful, a few of them are going to be directly, I'm directly speaking to the loved one or the person who is not necessarily coping with a mental illness or living with a mental illness, but the person who's maybe helping, or you could be the caretaker, the loved one, or other family member. So number 2, blaming the person for the illness. There are certain symptoms, depending on the illness, certain symptoms that are associated with severe and persistent mental illnesses, and it just varies with the illness. And I want to go over a few of them. Some of these are more frustrating than others. Cognitive impairments, negative symptoms, and what we call, I'm going to spell it, ANOSOGNOSIA, and we'll talk about that more, okay? Cognitive impairments. The level of impairment will depend on the illness, right? All mental illnesses have a certain degree of what we call cognitive impairments associated with it. The level depends on the type of illness. Cognitive impairments can be seen in the person's inability to think clearly, to pay attention, to remember, recall information, to process information quickly, to organize, and or to perform or to problem solve quickly. So sometimes you may be talking to your loved one or a person that's dealing with diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness, and then you may become frustrated because it seems like they're not listening, or it seems like you told them to do something one time and they're not doing it, and you think maybe they're just being stubborn, or they're getting on your nerve. Please understand that there are cognitive impairments associated with living with a mental illness. So again, when we're talking about the symptoms of a mental illness, especially severe and persistent mental illnesses, what do I mean when I say severe and persistent mental illness? In particular, schizophrenia, in particular bipolar, and depending on where you live, look at that, major depression. As I may have mentioned before, when we talk about severe and persistent mental illness or severe mental illnesses, we're talking about a classification of illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life to a very high degree. So we're talking about a person's ability to hold down a job, a person's ability to interact with loved ones, family members, a person's ability to understand. Many severe and persistent mental illnesses are seen early in life. They're young people's, if you will, disorders. So we can see some of the symptoms associated with schizophrenia or bipolar when a person is a teenager or a young adult. We're talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses that are so severe. Severe and persistent mental illnesses, if left untreated, those are the type of people that you see out in the cold talking to themselves, or out in the cold not knowing where they're going to get their next meal from, or not even being aware that they're out in the cold. They're out there and they're not aware that they should have a coat on because it's snowing, or that they should be go someplace and get warm because they're so we're talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses. Again, untreated mental illnesses, that there is treatment for mental illnesses. Let me stop here and say that there is treatment. The treatment works. Unfortunately, many of our loved ones don't get the treatment that we need. So as a result, many mental illnesses go untreated. And when mental illnesses are untreated, I always like to say that it can limit or impacts a person's destiny. Untreated mental illnesses can limit how far we go in school, can limit what we do at work. It can limit the friends and how we interact with other people. Untreated mental illnesses can lead to a person taking their life by suicide. Untreated mental illnesses can lead to a person withdrawing from their family members. In the line of work that I do, I run across many people who had family members that they haven't seen 20, 25, 30 years because of an untreated mental illness. No one understood what was going on with the individual. They just assumed that the person was just being defiant, or the person, they didn't understand. The person walked away from their family members thinking that it was something that they said or something that they did, not understanding that this is the impact of untreated mental illnesses. Untreated mental illnesses leads to a whole host of other problems. But anyway, let me get back to my 10 things that are not helpful. Going back to cognitive impairments. Cognitive impairments are, to some degree, are associated with mental illnesses. So just because a person may seem to be slow or they're not paying attention, you think, they are. I don't know how many times I may have been talking to someone and I may have been saying, so-and-so, do this, or can we do this, or whatever, and I get the blank look, or they seem like they're not getting it, and then maybe 2 days later, they come back and they're able to tell me what we said and what the plan was and what we're going to do. So it's not that the person is not getting it. Your loved one is not understanding. It just takes them a while to get it. It takes them a minute to process information. There is this exercise that we do sometime to get people to understand what it's like to actually hear voices. Now, when you're talking about hearing voices, we all hear voices, our own voices sometimes, and talking to ourselves, and we may be doing things and talking to ourselves. But what I'm talking about are auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations. Well, auditory hallucinations, when you're hearing these voices over and over again, when you're going through life because of untreated mental illnesses and you're having to deal with these voices in your head, it's hard to concentrate on anything else. So if I'm focused on these voices, and like I said, this exercise that we do, you and another partner, try it, right? Three of you, get you and two other partners, right? Try you and your partner engaging in a conversation, and then having the third person getting in your ear and just talking. And you can see how distracting that is. Imagine having to live like that. Imagine having to go through the greater part of your day with seeming like somebody talking in your ears all the time. Well, that's just a little bit of what it's like to hear voices that have to deal with that on 24/7 or on a regular basis. So when you're having to deal with those voices and someone else is talking to you, it takes you a minute to kind of figure out what's going on. So again, it's not that the person doesn't hear you, it just takes a minute. So that's one piece. But the cognitive impairments actually impact the way the person's ability to pay attention. Okay, a person's ability to process information, a person's executive functioning, all of these things are impacted. So again, 10 things that are not helpful is just assuming that just because a person is not responding quickly, that they're not responding, they're not listening, and then you become frustrated. You don't want to become frustrated. Medications. This is the second thing. Sometimes your loved ones may not want to take their medications. Again, we assume that people who don't want to take medications, and you hear that over and over again, they don't want to take their medications. Well, let me say a couple things. Some people have to take several medications, so every day for the rest of their lives. It's no wonder they don't want to take medications. I wouldn't want to take medications. You wouldn't want to take medications every day. It takes a while. It takes a process to get to the point where you realize that this is my lifeline and that I do have to take medications. There are people with diabetes. There are people with other chronic illnesses who have to take medications, but they skip sometimes because they're just tired of taking medications. So a person living with a mental illness, whether it's severe and persistent or general mental illness, is no different. No one wants to have to take medications the rest of their life. Again, it's a process, right? It's a process of coming to that understanding. It's part of the recovery process. The recovery, what is recovery? When we talk about mental illnesses, we're talking about the point that a person comes to when they realize that, yes, I have this going on with me, but that I can live a life in spite of living with a mental illness. That's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. Some people, they get to that point quicker than others. Some people, they don't, right? So again, let's be clear. Let's be honest. Taking medications is not easy. Some people have to take medications several times a day. Some people have to take 3 and 4 medications. Some people have to get IM or injections. It's a pain in the neck. It's not a good thing to have to take medications. So let's be clear about that. Now, what we're talking about here, there are some people who don't even believe that they're sick. There are some people who feel like they don't have to take medications, and there's a term for this, right? And I've been doing this 100 years, and I can never pronounce a term, so I'm going to spell it for you. It's ANOSOGNOSIA. You can look it up. But what does it mean? It is a symptom that manifests in a person's inability. Get this, a person's inability to recognize their symptoms or need to take medications. So if I feel I'm not sick, I don't recognize that there's a problem, so of course I'm not going to take medications. So again, it's not that the person's being stubborn. It's not that the person just wants to get on your last nerve. I really don't think I'm sick. I really don't think I need to take medications. And there's a term for that. And that term is ANOSOGNOSIA. Again, I've been in graduate school and I've been doing this 100 years, and that's a word that always gets me. But again, just know that the person is not doing this to get on your nerve. They really don't think they're sick. They really don't think that they need medications. Another term, and this is the second point under blaming the person for their symptoms. Cognitive impairments we talked about. We talked about anosogny, the word I can't pronounce, but it's when you don't want to take your medications. And the last one under number 2 is what we call negative symptoms. Negative symptoms. When we talk about schizophrenia, all mental health diagnoses have certain characteristics or certain symptoms associated with it, right? When we talk about schizophrenia, there are positive symptoms, and then there's what's called negative symptoms, and then of course the cognitive impairments. I'm talking about negative symptoms. Negative symptoms are symptoms we call blunted affect. That's when the person is sitting there and they're affect, their emotions, they seem to have little emotions. It seems like they don't want to talk. You talk to them and it's like, hey, hi. It's real short, right? We call that negative symptoms, right? Negative symptoms are seen when the loved ones are showing very little emotion. There's a reduction in drive. Sometimes you may look at them and say that person is just lazy. Sometimes it can get mixed up with depression, because it almost looks like the person is depressed, but it's not depression. It's that the person is a symptom of schizophrenia. It's one of the symptoms associated with schizophrenia, and it's a category. We call it negative symptoms, right? And what do we mean call it negative? Negative has to do with the absence of symptoms. Positive and negative symptoms. Positive are things that are too much of, and negative are things that's not enough. So everybody has an affect. Everybody has an emotion, right? We call it negative because that means something has been taken away. The normal range of emotions is not there. The normal range, if someone tells a joke that you find funny, you laugh. When you look at negative symptoms associated with schizophrenia, the person doesn't laugh or laugh very little. They may be apathetic. They don't care. They don't want to talk to people. They can sit in one place for hours and not be bothered, right? So again, these are some of the negative symptoms associated with living with a severe and persistent mental illness. Let me review real quickly here. I started about the 10 things, because I know I can go on and on. I love this. I'm passionate about this. I think when we talk about severe and persistent mental illness, we have to do a better job in helping our brothers and sisters who are living with severe and persistent mental illness. Mental illnesses in general, but in particular severe and persistent mental illnesses. When I look at now, this is 2 February 2019. And many parts of the United States has been impacted with just like crazy cold weather, right? Even if a person in Chicago says cold, it's cold, right? And I see so many of our people, meaning our people. These are people of the human race who are living with a severe and persistent mental illness, who are outside in this cold weather because they don't know they need to come in. It's one thing for a person to say, I don't want to go into a shelter. I don't want to come in because they're dangerous, which is true. But it's another thing for a person that's sitting out there in their feces, okay? They've been sitting out there for days. They've been, and it's cold, and they don't feel the need. They don't understand that they need socks, that they need shoes, that they should have a coat on because of a severe and persistent mental illness. I always say, if you saw a person bleeding on the street, right, you would at least call 911. So if you're walking by and you see someone that you can tell that there's something going on with them cognitively, there's something going on with them, they have a severe and persistent mental illness, and it's freezing outside, just call somebody, right? Even if, I know the police are not going to like this, but if you don't have a number to a crisis team, you don't know what number to call, you can log on to our website at igbatt.com. We're doing some renovations, but we do have some numbers that you can call. But in a situation like that, if you don't know who to call 911 and say, hey, this person's out here on the street. I know, that's not the police job, but maybe they can connect you to someone. There's a non-emergency number. Don't let your brother and sister freeze to death because they understand that they're sick. But anyway, that's just another one of my rants. 10 things are not helpful. I said asking the right question at the wrong time. Did you take your medications when they're expressing a normal emotion? 2, blaming the person for their symptoms. And under that, I listed 3 areas that we tend to focus on because they tend to be the most problematic for people. 1, the cognitive impairments. because of the cognitive impairments, the person may not be, maybe quote unquote in your terms, a little slow. It don't seem like they're getting it, so you become frustrated. Because of their mental illness, the person may not want to take their medications or even think that they have an illness. Third thing, the negative symptoms, especially associated with schizophrenia. That's associated with schizophrenia. Okay. I'm just looking something here. Okay, I'm just kind of looking at something here. Kind of forgive me here for a minute. Someone just emailed me and told me they're not getting the broadcast. So I want to make sure that that's not the case. Okay, so I am actually going to keep going because if they didn't get it, they would kind of let me know, I think. Okay, I'm actually going to keep going. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, but I'm going to keep going. So those are the 10 things that's associated with this. If I have to, these 10 things at some point will be listed on our website. I just have to kind of finish with it. Yeah, I just have to kind of finish with it. So again, just in the order, the first thing, what did I say? The first thing was asking the right question at the wrong time, blaming the person for their symptoms, because there are certain symptoms that are more problematic for family members than others, and that could be the cognitive impairments, person not wanting to take their medications or thinking that they're ill, believing that they're ill, or the negative symptoms. The third thing, 10 things are not helpful, is assuming mental illness is the same thing as a lack of intelligence. Treating loved ones who are diagnosed with a mental illness like they are stupid or a child, again, is so disrespectful. I've been in meetings where the person who's living with it, I'm talking to the person who's living with a mental illness, and other people, again, want to be helpful, talking as if the person is not there. Intelligence has nothing to do with having a mental illness. Many of your loved ones sometimes are more intelligent than you are. Okay? It has nothing to do with that. 4, assuming that you know what it's like. Unless you're living with a mental illness, you don't know what it's like, number 1. And then even then, there's a certain camaraderie you can have. I have a mental illness, you have a mental illness. We're both diagnosed with the same thing, with schizophrenia. Yeah, there's a certain camaraderie. But even then, the stories are different. But don't assume that you know. Instead of assuming, ask questions. Ask what is helpful. Ask how you can help. Don't just assume that you know. Number 5, giving bad advice about medications. Don't discourage the use of medications. Medications, prayer, and other people can all be helpful depending on the needs of the person. So don't dismiss the need to take medications. Sometimes we need medications. Sometimes some of us may have to take medications forever. Some of us may take it for a short period of time. But if you need to take it, don't discourage taking medications. It's definitely not helpful. Unless you're a doctor, right? You don't want to do that. Next thing, call people names because they don't want to get help. Let me go back to number 5. Bad advice about medication. Bad advice about going to the hospital. If a person is having a mental health crisis, people think that having to go into the hospital is the worst thing. It is not. And here I'm talking to the loved one as well as the person that's coping with the mental illness. If you have to go into the hospital, it doesn't have to be the end of the world. In fact, it can be the beginning. Okay, because going into the hospital can help you get your medication stabilized. Sometimes it can help you to get a better understanding of your diagnosis. So it's not the end of the world. It may seem like it, but it's not. 6, call people names because they don't want to get help or they don't understand mental illnesses in the way you think they should. This is not productive. For some reason, people think that calling people names, oh, they're so stupid because they don't want to get help, or, there are certain people who call certain people, entire group of people, they're just so ignorant and backwards because they don't understand mental illness or understand mental health. That is not helpful. I don't know how you think that would be helpful. That is not helpful. Not at all. Next thing, understand the impact of the illness. Living with a mental illness can be difficult. It is difficult. Depending on the illness, symptoms can be episodic or continual. Being diagnosed with a mental illness changes your life. Just like when you watch the wave go in and out on the beach, and how that beach changes, mental illness changes. It changes depending on when you were diagnosed. As far as your age, how you were diagnosed, the type of medications and the treatment you're able to get, it changes your ability to work. It can change your ability to interact with other people, to go to school. It changes your life forever. Trying to dictate the pace. People move at different paces, so be patient. Assuming that just because people don't talk about mental illnesses in the same way that you do, that they are backwards or ignorant. It's not that people don't care. It's that sometimes people are preoccupied with other things. Going back to the other point that I made, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people are going to be more focused on those basic needs first. So if I'm wondering how I'm going to eat, where I'm going to sleep, my child is in jail or in the penitentiary or whatever the case is, I'm not worried about mental health at that moment, right? Because I'm trying to get over this emergency, this crisis at the moment. So again, going back to this, people calling people stupid. I hate that. That's my thing. Because people are not stupid just because they're not where you think they should be. Right? People have other things going on with them. It just takes time. Number 10. Assuming that the church doesn't talk about mental illness. People say that all the time. The church should not talk about mental illness, and that's not true. I'm part of the ecclesia. I know plenty of other people who are, and we've been talking about mental illnesses for forever. If you go on our website, igbatt.com, you can see how long that we have been doing this. So it's been a long time. Again, these are 10 things. And I'm going to shut down here. I may have to come back because people are still telling me that there are problems with the feed here. But again, these are 10 things that are not helpful. Asking the right question at the wrong time, blaming the person for their symptoms, not really having an understanding about cognitive impairments, why people don't want to take medications, negative symptoms, assuming mental illness is the same as intelligence, assuming you know what it's like, calling people names because they don't want to get help or think the same way that you think, understand the impact of the illness, trying to dictate the pace, and assuming that the church doesn't want to talk about mental illness or not involved. Because again, that is not the case. Again, this has been It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, igbatt.com, and I may be back in a few minutes depending on what's going on with the feed. God bless and have a good day.